Bodeau. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm privileged to serve here as minister. This week we are kicking off a series on world religions. We have a number of weeks learning about some different traditions and the holidays and the celebrations that are important to them. Today, as I invite our bowl to sound, I want to give you a little bit of an understanding of the bowl itself. These bowls are commonly called Tibetan bowls. They're more often now called Himalayan bowls because they originate in the Himalayan region. And these bowls, the most ancient of these bowls, actually we still don't know what the alloy is that they're made out of. The oldest bowls, we don't know how to reproduce the way they're made. We still don't know how to reproduce the way they're made. So the newer bowls and the older bowls are quite different from each other. And a bowl is considered a sacred object. It's not a musical instrument, it's a spirit being. So sometimes we say we are ringing the bowl, but I always say I am inviting the bowl to sound. Because it is the spirit of the bowl that makes the decision about how to express its voice in this particular moment, in this particular place. So as I invite our bowl to sound this morning, I invite you to simply observe that with a slightly different perspective. Instead of thinking of it as just a gonging sound that's supposed to change your brain waves, think of it as the spirit of the bowl entering the space.
Richard Ross is going to light the chalice this morning. This reading is a poem of the 13th century Persian poet Sadi Shirazi, and is called To Serve the People. To worship God is nothing other than to serve the people. It does not need rosaries, prayer carpets, or robes. All peoples are members of the same body, created from one essence. If fate brings suffering to one member, the others cannot stay at rest. Before the choir comes up to sing, I want to say a few words about the nature of music in the Islamic world. Many of us, if we think about music and Islam at all, think about the banning of all music extreme views about music that are not by any means universal throughout the Muslim world. If any of you have traveled in Muslim countries, and especially if you've ever ridden a bus or taken a taxi, you will know that music may seem inescapable in some areas. The degree to which music is regulated in a given country or area is dependent on the nature of the dominant religious authorities in that area, based on their interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith, which delineate proper behavior for followers of Islam. In the strictest regimes, the call to prayer is the only form of musical expression that is permitted. In others, only vocal music is allowed, and then only in same-gender groups. Musical instruments are sometimes considered haram or forbidden except for drums or tambourines. In some Muslim traditions, strictly religious music is permitted, but any music that might lead to illicit behavior is not allowed. This restriction may seem familiar to those with experience in conservative Christian churches. That is, rock of ages is okay, but rock and roll is not. In the more permissive societies, secular music is allowed and popular, with some restrictions on content and venue. This also includes folk music, which has deep traditions in many Muslim countries. In some Sufi traditions, music is actually incorporated into the worship practices. And this brings me to today's music. Not surprisingly, there is no Islamic music in our hymnals, but the words of one of our most familiar hymns come from the Sufi poet and mystic Rumi. And the choir is now going to come up and sing, "Come, Come, Whoever You Are."
Though broken your vows 1,000 times, though broken your vows 1,000 times, though broken your vows, though louder you are, the wonder of worship, the power of grief, the causes your carols, the lost despair, come, yes, and broken your vows, whoever you are, the wonder of worship, the wonder of grief, the causes your carols, and lost despair. Come, yet again, come.
So, I'm just curious how many of you have heard of the poet Jalaluddin Rumi? You usually just hear him called Rumi. Jalal al-Din Rumi. Often when we talk about him, who wrote those words, that is one of his most well-known poems, we think of him as a mystic, but we don't often talk about him as a Muslim. We have a tendency to kind of glide past that. And actually what's really interesting is that for those of us who are familiar with Rumi and have read some of his poetry, some of the most popular translations of Rumi were written in a way to actually kind of erase the references to Allah and to religious concepts to make it more comfortable for Westerners. There are a lot of projects going on right now to actually do more accurate translations of Rumi to reflect his deeply devout Muslim truth that he was in fact a deeply religious person. So there are lots of things around Rumi's poetry that are interesting to us in the West. He was a mystic. He's most closely connected with the mystical traditions and the Sufi traditions. But he was, in fact, someone who practiced all of the pillars of Islam. And so before we go any further in our service today, which is about Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, I'd like to share with you a poem that Jalaluddin Rumi wrote about Your chick frets within the egg with all your eating and choking. Break out of your shell that your wings may grow. Let yourself fly. The lips of the master are parched from calling the beloved. The sound of your call resounds through the horn of your empty belly. Let nothing be inside of you. Be empty. Give your lips to the lips of the reed. When like a reed you fill with his breath, then you'll taste sweetness. Sweetness is hidden in breath that fills the reed. Be like Mary. Be that sweet breath a child grew within her.
We will now receive an offering for the support of Westside, its people, its service to the congregation and the community, and all the other things we care for and rely on. Our Share the Plate partner this quarter is the Unitarian Universalist Association, which will receive a portion of donations not otherwise designated. If you are joining us on YouTube and would like to make a donation, you will see a QR code that will take you to the Westside donation site, or you can go to the Westside website and find the donations welcome section. Sandra Thomas will be playing How Could Anyone as the greeters come by.
Thank you, Sandra. So, as I said, this week we are starting a series of conversations about world religious traditions. You know, in the fall, we often talk about how there are many world traditions that have holidays of lights. You know, from mid-October until December, early January, there are many holidays of lights. The spring is like that as well. There are a number of holidays right around this time of year that are important to a number of major world religions. So we're going to talk about a few of those. This week we're looking at the Muslim holiday, the month-long season of Ramadan. Next week we'll be talking about the Christian holiday Easter. The following week we'll be talking about the Jewish celebration of Passover, and then after that the pagan celebration of Beltane or May Day. And then also in mid-May we're going to have a chance to hear about Taoism. So we're going to begin with Ramadan. How many of you, in listening to that poem, just think for a second, I know that when I heard it the first time, I was surprised by the last line, which is a reference to Mary, the mother of Jesus. We're going to talk about that. The poem that I read is all about what is at the center of Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, which is fasting. Rumi is telling us to become empty, to put away food so that we can be filled with the breath, just as the bowl has a breath or a sound that comes through it out of that emptiness. So,
Unlike the Western Gregorian calendar, which is solar based on the timing of the sun's movements, the Islamic calendar is actually lunar, and it's organized by the movement of the moon. We're going to talk next week about how Easter, notice how Easter is on different days each year. That's because it is also a lunar holiday. A lunar solar holiday. It's a mix. And that's also the Jewish calendar is, I think it's called a lun solar or sol lunar calendar. So they have different calendric cycles than we are used to. So the way that the date of Ramadan is determined is this. The month of Ramadan is the 9th month in the Islamic calendar, and it is determined by the first sighting of the crescent moon after the new moon of the 8th month. So when the crescent moon appears, that's the first day of the month of Ramadan, and it goes until the sighting of the first crescent moon after the new moon at that month. This year, that happens to fall between April 2nd and May 2nd. During the month of Ramadan, Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset, so they eat a meal before sunrise, and then they do not eat through the course of the day and then eat again after sunset. This ends with a celebration called Eid or Eid. I'm going to pronounce this badly. It's Eid al-Fitr, which is the big meal at the end, the big celebration at the end of the month of Ramadan. And this particular practice, fasting through the month of Ramadan, is one of the 5 pillars or central practices of all Muslim religious observance. But we're going to back up a little bit and get some basic context for this. The Arabic word Islam means surrender. It means to surrender, and in specific, it refers to surrendering to the will of the one God, or Allah. Islam is one of the so-called Abrahamic faiths, along with Judaism and Christianity, because they share a number of core stories and figures and religious tenets. They all have stories of Abraham and Moses, and in fact honor many of the same traditions and teachers and religious tenets. While Muslims see the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the last and most perfect of God's messengers, they also include Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus as part of their list of honored prophets. Muslims believe that the month of Ramadan in ancient times, so this is a calendric month, it'd be like saying the month of August. The month of Ramadan throughout time was the month of revelation, during which many scripts in different eras, all holy scriptures were revealed, including the scrolls of Abraham, the Torah, the Psalms, the Gospels, and of course the Holy Quran. And it is the story of the revelation of the Quran that is at the center of the month of the Ramadan celebrations we have now. So, the Quran was given to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, through a series of revelations, the first of which occurred in the year 610. Muhammad lived in the city of Mecca in the 6th century, in the end of the 6th century into the 7th century, as part of a tribe of merchants and traders. When he was 40 years old, he began having visions and spiritual dreams, and he began a practice of meditating at Mount Hira as a way to try to make sense of these visions that were coming to him. And on one of these trips to the mountain, to a cave in the mountain to meditate, the angel Jibril, which in English is Gabriel, appeared to him and began conveying to him the text of the Quran. This particular night is now referred to as the night of power or the night of destiny. I'm going to try to pronounce it in Arabic, Lalat al-Qadar in Arabic. And it's said to have occurred towards the end, somewhere towards the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan. The messages that were revealed to Muhammad, peace be upon him, through these visions revealed a single God. Now this is important because, remember, his community was polytheistic. And he started teaching and talking about a monotheistic, one God, one true God religion. As he began to teach and share these messages, he came into political conflict with the leaders of his community and the people of his community. And eventually, he and his followers had to leave the city of Mecca and flee to the city of Medina. In 622, the year they left for Medina, that year is now considered year 1 in the Islamic calendar. Okay? And it's referred to as Hijra, the flight. So that year is the first year in the calendar that then it becomes the marker of time, just as in the Christian world, Jesus' life and death mark the calendric beginning of what we switch from the before the Common Era into the Common Era. The first time of fasting is said to have happened in the 2nd year of Hijra, the 2nd year after the flight to Medina. So, fasting. Have any of you ever practiced fasting? Fasting not for the purpose of losing weight, but fasting for the purpose of gaining insight, gaining wisdom, becoming like a reed, empty, or an empty bowl. Returning to Jalaluddin Rumi, we understand the importance of such fasting in the Muslim tradition. This is another Rumi poem about specifically the month of Ramadan. There's hidden sweetness in the stomach's emptiness. We are lutes, no more, no less. When the sound box is filled, no music comes forth. When the brain and belly burn from fasting, every moment a new song rises out of the fire. The mist clear, and a new vitality makes you spring up the steps before you. Be empty and cry as a reed instrument. Be empty and write secrets with a reed pen. When satiated by food and drink, an unsightly metal statue is seated where your spirit should be. When you fast, good habits gather, like friends who want to help. Fasting is Solomon's ring. Don't give in to illusion and lose your power, but even when will and control have been lost, they will return when you fast. Like soldiers appearing out of the ground or pennants flying in the breeze. A table descends to your tents, Jesus' table. Expect to see it when you fast, this table spread with other food, better than the broth of cabbages. Think about that for a minute. What it means to abstain. In the Christian tradition, right now, abstaining is part of the preparation for Easter. Lent involves abstaining from things to make oneself clear in order to be ready for the coming of Easter. Now, eventually, Muhammad and his followers retook the city of Mecca from the polytheistic tribes, and that city today is still the holy center of that particular religion. Along with the honoring the month of Ramadan, visiting Mecca is one of the 5 pillars of Islamic faith. These core requirements of faithful Muslims include these 5 practices. The first is the profession of faith, stating the belief that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Faithfully proclaiming that and believing it is the first of the pillars. The second is prayer. Muslims pray facing Mecca 5 times a day, at dawn, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, and after dark. Prayer includes a recitation of the opening chapter of the Quran and is sometimes performed on a small rubber mat used expressly for the purpose. Muslims can pray individually at any location or together in a mosque where a leader in prayer, an imam, guides the congregation. Men gather in the mosque for the noonday prayer on Friday. Women are welcome but not obliged to participate. After the prayer, a sermon focuses on a passage from the Quran, followed by prayers by the imam and a discussion of a particular religious topic. So, profession of faith, prayer. The third pillar is alms. In accordance with Islamic law, Muslims donate a fixed portion of their income to community members in need. Fourth is fasting. During the daylight hours of the month of Ramadan, the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, all healthy adult Muslims are required to abstain from food and drink. There are exceptions for people who are ill or elderly or pregnant or nursing. There are exceptions if your health requires you not to fast. But for all healthy adults, and I believe it starts at like age 10 or 11 or something like that. So fasting is just considered a normal part for 1 month every year for everybody's life. And finally, pilgrimage. Every Muslim whose health and finances permit it must make at least one visit to the holy city of Mecca, which is in present-day Saudi Arabia. The Kaaba, a cubical structure, it's a structure which is covered in black embroidered hangings, is at the center of the Haram Mosque in Mecca, and Muslims believe that it is the house that Abraham built for God. And they face in the direction of this structure when they pray, every time they pray. Today there are over 1.6 billion followers of Islam in the world. And it's divided into two main sects, the Sunni and the Shia. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died in 632, most of his followers believed that the elite members of the existing Islamic community should choose his successor, the leader. A smaller group believed that someone from his family should take his place as leader. And particularly, they were in favor of his cousin and son-in-law, Ali. They believed that Ali was the proper choice. So this latter group that was in favor of his relative Ali becoming the leader are referred to as the Shi'at Ali, the followers of Ali. That group is now referred to as the Shia. The Sunni are the ones who follow the Sunnah, the tradition, the existing group of leaders. Now, these two groups hold many of the very same beliefs. There are some significant social, political, and religious differences between them, and those have become much more pronounced actually in the last probably 50 or 60 years. Things have really heated up between the Sunni and the Shia, which is why we see so much tension in the Middle East and in Muslim countries. They are very different socially and politically in many ways. These differences have given rise to some political upheavals and some military conflicts. Okay. We cannot begin to touch on all that is the story of Islam, the traditions and the beliefs. All we can do is begin to become interested in it. So the question I found myself asking after thinking about this week was, what's the takeaway from such a cursory review of the month of Ramadan, which during the month of Ramadan, the goal is to read one section of the sections of the Quran every single day, to break the Quran down into 30 sections, 28 or 30 sections, and read the whole thing by the end of the month. That's huge. Such a cursory review of that month, let alone the whole tradition and history of Islam. So one thing I would suggest that's a worthwhile takeaway is this: how important it is to understand religious history as a prime mover in geopolitical history. It took me years trying to understand when I would listen to the politics of the Sunni and the Shia, like what the heck was the difference between them? Where did that come from? When I finally understood that this is a difference in who gets the rule, the power of succession after a leader passes, that's a huge thing to understand. So that's an important takeaway. We need to understand religious history in order to understand geopolitical history. Second, from the perspective of our own religious practices here as Unitarian Universalists, here at Westside and in the West in general, how many of us have heard the song, "Come, Come, Whoever You Are" before? Pretty much, if you've been in a UU church, you've heard it. But did you know its origins? Do we take the time to understand where it came from, what its history is, what was the theology of the person who wrote that piece of music. It's really important to locate inspirational figures like Jalaluddin Rumi, whom we love to quote and whom we love to say, oh, we love Rumi. It's important to put them in their historical and theological context. And finally, we might look at the importance of specific religious practices themselves, such as fasting, for their spiritual value. In Unitarian Universalism, we hold a very high spiritual value on the rite of the coffee. Do we not? We hold a very high spiritual value on the rite of the coffee and the Mecca that is Starbucks. Right? We do. And then someday we'll be back to potlucks, and that's a big deal too. We put a lot of social value on the act of eating and drinking. Right? I know that as a pastor, I find it extremely awkward that I do not drink coffee or tea. Because what am I supposed to say to someone when I say, would you like to have a pastoral conversation? Shall we go get some lemonade? Right? I often say tea just because it's all like, we have very strong social ideas about these things. Just as some Christians celebrate certain kinds of abstinence during Lent, and Muslims hold to fasting during the month of Ramadan, we have our own religious rituals around how we gather, what's appropriate, how often we should do certain things. It's interesting to think about maybe trying out somebody else's tradition. I think it's a fascinating idea to attempt fasting, not for the purpose of losing weight, but if you're healthy, this is also true. I think probably the first time I ever fasted was on a spirit quest led by a Native American elder, where we didn't eat for a couple of days. Things change when you change your routine. What if I were to stand up here and say, which I will not do, because this is Unitarian Universalism, for this month in preparation for flower communion, you are all to abstain from coffee for 30 days. I saw those faces. Eyes got big, people freaked out. Well, wouldn't it be curious if you just did it for a week to see what happened? What feelings does it cause to arise? Rumi is telling us that when we change those patterns, something is allowed to be born. Something new can occur. We know ourselves differently. We become aware of the things that our habits and patterns are covering up. Like maybe the fact that we're not getting enough sleep. Who knows? It's just an interesting idea. As we hold that the wisdom of the world's religion is a rich source of guidance and inspiration. So it's important to remember that we can be good visitors in those traditions, honoring them with a true understanding and attempt to learn about their history, and also by respecting their integrity, which means to actually value their practices. To actually say, 1.6 billion people on this planet right now are fasting all day long for the whole month. It's easy to think, wow, that's hard. Wow, okay, that's interesting. Let's be curious. Let's be respectful. Let's honor the integrity of the wisdom of that tradition and say, I don't necessarily know what it means, but wow, that seems really powerful. As we go through these next few weeks talking about these different traditions, I invite us into that spirit of curiosity and respect. Let us start with the assumption that traditions other than ours truly have wisdom to share, not just the parts we like, but also the parts that seem strange and uncomfortable to us, that there's wisdom there that we might not yet know. I would hope that by becoming better citizens of our cultural and historical and religious world, we can also become better neighbors and cultivate the sorts of healthy, healing bridges and relationships between ourselves and others that we claim to be so proud to have. So be curious, my friends. Be curious this month and be respectful. May it be so. One of the ways that we show our respect for each other and honor each other is by sharing what's going on in our lives. For those of you who are with us virtually,